All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Eli Harrington, and we are joining you live here on the Marijuana Policy Project Facebook page. Joined with our special guest, Mr. Rick Steves, a man who is not unfamiliar to you all. We are coming to you here from Burlington, Vermont, in the Heady Vermont studios. We are here in beautiful Burlington. Heady Vermont is an independent advocacy group publishing company, and today we are very fortunate to get to work with the Marijuana Policy Project, also with NORML, to host Mr. Rick Steves. So thank you very much, Rick, for being here.
Good to be here, Eli.
We are here at the tail end of what has been a whirlwind tour for you. Travel is not something that is out of the ordinary, but I thought maybe we could kind of start for the folks who are watching on the MPP page, on Facebook, on our Instagram page, and then we'll see this later. Maybe give a little bit of context to what your trip has been, this sort of East Coast swing, where you started, and what you've seen along the way.
Great. Well, every 2 years I like to go get out and raise awareness of this issue. And in 2012, of course, it was Washington State, that's my state, and went on a kind of a barnstorming tour there to go to conservative communities and let them know that this is a smart policy and a good thing for our community. 2 years later was Oregon, and then I worked with the Marijuana Policy Project in Massachusetts and Maine in 2016, and I worked with MPP in Chicago a couple months ago, and I've had a beautiful week with MPP from Washington, D.C. to Maryland and Delaware and New Jersey and now in Vermont, and I just really like sharing both my European perspective on this and also our experience in Washington State. So it's been a real good week, and MPP's done a great job of getting the word out.
Well, and let's kind of maybe start earlier at the beginning of the week, because you were in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And I think that's kind of a good way to set the scene, is talking about sort of our federal policy.
Right.
And I'm curious as far as, you know, sort of how that discussion is going. You're somebody who's been a long-time NORML board member. You've been an advocate for a long time, and you've been an ambassador for this cause for a long time.
Right.
So what's sort of the tone of the conversation in Washington now, and how has that kind of changed a little bit, and you know, where do you think it might be headed, and where should it be headed?
You know, I think this is going to come from the populace. Politicians need to know that it's not dangerous politically to speak common sense on marijuana reform policy, and I like to really remind anybody who's a decision maker, this is not pro-pot. Some people are pro-pot. I'm not pro-pot. I'm anti-prohibition. I'm pro-civil liberties. I'm anti-racism. I'm pro-fiscal responsibility. There's a lot of ways you can frame this. But you know, a lot of politicians, it's just the reality of our government. They understand what's right, but they have to vote what's going to keep them in office. And the perception is the people are afraid of this. So we've got to normalize, that's why I'm a board member of NORML, just normalize the approach to marijuana. It's not as big, scary, reefer madness kind of thing as people have been wired to believe it is. And what we try to do is take the freakiness out of it and let people know this is just common sense, good policy. And that's what we were talking about in Washington, D.C. And it was interesting when we were in Washington, D.C., people told me, you know, this is really, it floats on all the aides, the legislative aides. And there are a lot of people in their 20s and 30s. And they're the ones that are there learning about this, asking the smart questions. And then, you know, their representative or their senator, you know, they don't really know what's going on with this. They sit down, what should I do about that? And the aides say, well, you know, Washington and Colorado did this. DUIs didn't go up. Crime didn't go up. And you want some tax revenue? Boy, you're going to get some tax revenue. And, you know, you can talk to your senator that way.
Well, and increasingly, you know, like you said, it's not a partisan issue, you know, necessarily, and it's something that appeals to a lot of different people. And I love that intergenerational, multi-generational aspect, because, you know, here we are, we're doing this on a digital live stream. You know, you're somebody who is on a standard, on a public television format, and has been coming to all of our living rooms for years and years. And that's why I think it's so great to have you as an advocate, you know, and as somebody who can sort of help bridge that gap. Because I think for folks like myself and our video producers and our audience here and the Heady Vermont folks, you know, it seems like there's a generational divide. Well, you know, but I don't think my parents aren't.
Heady Vermont, there's going to be that would be a friendly sort of cross section of our society. There's a lot of people that are scared to death about marijuana, and we have HempFest in Seattle, and it's 80,000 people coming out to celebrate cannabis every summer, and you take the average suburban Seattleite and walk him through HempFest, it's going to it's going to scare them.
Yeah.
And we've got to remind people, the world is not going to become one big hemp fest if we legalize.
Right.
Use will not change. I look out my window every morning in my office, and I look at my Andia Mayberry town, Edmonds,
Yep.
and I have to remind myself, marijuana is legal in this community. It hasn't
Right.
changed at all. The only thing that's changed is, there's a shop with a green sign on it as you drive into town. You buy your marijuana there instead of from a criminal on the street, and our law enforcement is redirected at important things rather than running down petty pot smokers.
Well, and it's funny because you're somebody whose profession is showing people, right? You could describe things, and as effective as you are as an author, you're also a television visual person.
Right.
And I think about this with, kind of cannabis reform, how we can tell people and they can go and see it in Colorado, but, here, especially on the East Coast, I think it's something that's foreign, and that you have to really show people. They have to have that experience that you've had where they wake up and say, the sky has not fallen.
For a long time, one of the things I wanted to work with the ACLU and with NORML was to get some B-roll, so when there's a marijuana issue in the news, you don't show a bunch of wasted people with huge bongs and dreadlocks.
Right.
You got to show people playing the piano or sitting around with their friends looking at the view or taking a hike that enjoy mature adult recreational use of marijuana. So we have to change the image of it a little bit. That's why my favorite promotional shot for when I'm going out is I'm sitting at, I don't know if you've seen the shot, but I think we did it for High Times was doing a story on me or something like that. But I wanted to be playing my piano with Chopin on the music rack, and I had a wine glass filled with marijuana.
Yes, it's beautiful. If you Google, because we were talking about this with our social media team, if you Google Rick Steves marijuana, it's this beautiful picture, like you're holding a
great shot,
beautiful vintage wine, and you have the bud in your hand.
Here's a guy who's your neighbor. I'm sort of, my forte is not being scary, and I think we should take the crime out of the equation.
Well, and that's the thing where it's so interesting, right? And we say here as independent advocates in Vermont, we're kind of the pot people. Heady Vermont are you guys the weed people, the cannabis reform advocates, and part of our mission is saying, no, we're artists, young professionals, social entrepreneurs. We don't think this is a big deal, and you shouldn't either.
Right.
But when it comes from you, it strikes a different chord.
Well, that's one reason I've decided to spend a little bit of my celebrity on this. I mean, we're kind of hard up in the drug policy reform movement for celebrities because there's a lot of celebrities that enjoy marijuana responsibly, but their managers say you shouldn't go out on this or something. And I'm sort of just a two-bit celebrity, but I'm happy to give my 2 bits to this. And it's just so important that people recognize some of the people you have the greatest respect for in your church, in your business, on your main street. They enjoy marijuana. They've enjoyed it for 30 years. Their kids don't even know they enjoy it. And it's time for the land of the free and the home of the brave to be able to actually say, hey, I like it.
That's right. That's right. And
having said that, I'm always clear that I'm not pro-pot. I'm pro-civil liberties. And I acknowledge that marijuana is a drug. It can be abused. We got to take it seriously, just like alcohol. But it's time to stop arresting people for smoking it.
Well, and like you said, and you've taken flack from other advocates who don't think that it's far enough. But, you're somebody who I have to remind us and all of our team here that we talk about cannabis all the time.
Right.
But for a lot of people in the broader public, those suburban, folks, the hockey dads and the soccer moms and everyone in between, it is kind of a scarier thing. And the value of kind of incremental progress.
Yeah.
And so I want to know kind of how that discussion has changed for you, because you said in the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday, back when you started, it was a lot more radical. It was like you and Willie Nelson were kind of, some of the bigger picture celebrities. And so I kind of want to get some of that perspective because, I'm a millennial. We want to see things happen like this on Instagram immediately. But how's the tenor of the conversation changed?
Well, it's amazing how fast things have progressed in this area, but we still have to have patience. We have to be realistic. We got to realize that, we're probably speaking to the cannabis community here. Most people, they don't care about it that much. They just don't like the smell of it, and they're worried their kids are going to get into it or whatever.
Right.
They believe in the gateway effect and so on. So it's a matter of educating people. And I think what you've got to do is remember, you need to respect the anxieties and the concerns and the fears of people who are afraid of marijuana. The rights of employers in their workplace, safety on the road, don't advertise it to kids. There's all this common sense stuff. And if you can allay those concerns, then you can talk common sense. Do you want to be dedicating so much law enforcement resources to running down petty pot smokers, or do you want to go to serious issues that deserve the attention from law enforcement? Do you want to have your prisons, jammed with petty, nonviolent criminals, or do you want to use your resource dollars smarter there? Do you want to have a thriving black market? This is something that, I'm not really into making money from marijuana. A lot of people aren't. That's fine. I just want to stop arresting poor people and black people for smoking it, basically.
Yeah.
Rich white guys, we can smoke it forever. And we're never going to get.
And that's something, I think that's really impressive, that is really consistent throughout your message, right? Is that question of social justice and of racial justice, because we see that consistently. It is something that's used as a tool to criminalize and really oppress, not only communities of color, but also social, and kind of a wealth and class issue as well.
Yeah, it is.
Even as much as a racial issue. Yeah. And so that kind of moral imperative, starting at step one, with that very basic message, I think is really important and something that people understand.
And the more you learn about it, the more you realize this is a social justice issue. As well as a civil liberties issue and a safety for kids issue. In my state, the Children's Alliance in Washington State, this is a 100 organization whose mission is to look out for the well-being of children and families. They debated it long and hard in their circle, and they came out and endorsed I-502 in Washington State in 2012 because they know the most dangerous thing about marijuana for kids is the fact that it's illegal, and you got a guy out in the street trying to sell it to you.
Yep.
It's harder for kids to get it now. I mean, you guys know this, it's kind of common sense, but the general public has to learn when you legalize, tax, and regulate, you take it off the streets and you put it into a shop, and that shop's going to lose its license if they let a minor come in and buy it. And the toughest carding I've seen anywhere is trying to get into a marijuana retail outlet in Washington State.
Right. I
get carded.
Exactly.
I don't get carded to buy a drink anymore, but I get carded to go into a marijuana shop, which I think is good.
Well, and again, we just wrote about this with, in alcohol. They have the Dram Shop Act, which if you're the server, you're the one who's responsible, and that fosters that sense of responsibility in the bud tender or bartender, that they're the ones who are who's checking. We have the live stream. This is part of the fun part of this, is that we get to take questions. So cool. I'm going to sort of wrap those in through our conversation.
Okay.
One of them that I want to start with. Carlos weighed in. He's an attorney in New Mexico, and I think it's a chance to kind of ask, how can people in the professional services, like you said, folks who are coming on Rick Steves tours, who might be more established, people who are attorneys or medical professionals, and kind of the value of building that coalition, right, of advocates and getting the folks who are, how do you get maybe attorneys like
this is so
Carlos,
important.
He's here commenting on Facebook, but other attorneys to kind of take that step.
Yeah, because there's, you've probably heard of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, LEAP. It really should be called Retired Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, because most people in that profession can only talk the truth about it after they've been retired, because they don't have to worry about getting fired. I would say it's really important for people who care about this issue from a social justice point of view and a civil liberties in a principled way to don't hang out with your marijuana smoking buddies and talk about it. Talk about it in polite company. I took my pastor for a walk, and I told him I'm going to be outspoken on this, and I see no conflict between my faith and my advocacy for taking the crime out of the marijuana equation. Yeah. I talked to the big shots at public television. I said, I'm going to be outspoken on this, not because I'm pro-pot, but because I think it's a racist issue and it's a wrong-minded prohibition. You can proudly advocate to change a stupid law without advocating taking that drug. So you may like the drug, but if you're going to talk about it in an arena where you wouldn't normally feel comfortable talking about it, talk about it as an advocate for smarter policy. Right. It's not hard on drugs or soft on drugs. We need to become smart on drugs because we've got a horrible opioid crisis right now. And there's a lot of challenges confronting our society. And we've got to stop just parroting this reefer madness kind of stuff. And if you can learn about it, you can, like you mentioned, Google Rick Steves and marijuana. You learn more than you ever want to know about it. And I'm talking about my European experience and so on. You think of the Netherlands and you think of Portugal, how progressive they are on their marijuana laws. That's because a couple decades ago they had an opioid crisis. And they decided to take the soft drug out of the equation and deal credibly with the hard drug. And today in the Netherlands and in Portugal, because of their progressive policy to marijuana, they have a shrinking addicted population that is getting smaller and aging, and their marijuana consumption has stayed the same. The more you learn about this, the more you find there's all sorts of ways to frame it in your professional circles and in your social circles. But it's more important than ever for lawyers in New Mexico or whoever we're talking about here to don't be in the closet about this. I came out 10 years ago because I could do it because nobody could fire me and I don't need to get elected. Now you can come out if you're a lawmaker. You can come out in your profession and just stress marijuana is a drug. We're not saying it's good. It can be abused. You can even say it can be addictive. I mean, give a little on this discussion. You don't need to be this flaming hemp enthusiast.
Well, and I think we've seen. I mean, we're having this conversation here in Vermont. Our lieutenant governor, has been running on this since the mid '90s.
I saw his business card back then.
Yes, exactly. I know. It's Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman.
It's a great guy.
Organic farmer and longtime champion. And I think showing to also the policymakers and the lawmakers that, like you said, you can be out, as it were, and be for common sense and on the side of this.
Hey, you could be for safety.
You'll still win elections.
Well, in our state, a lot of people thought that, Roger Goodman, he's one of our state reps. He was an early outspoken proponent of legalizing marijuana. And his opponent in Bellevue or Redmond and east side of Lake Washington and Seattle area, they took out all sorts of ads against him. You're soft on drugs and all this kind of thing. And Roger's numbers spiked because the electorate now is smart enough to know this is not reefer madness stuff anymore.
Right.
It's, Jeff Sessions may embrace this and some ancient Governor LePage or somebody like that might still be dragging their knuckles.
But it's coming full circle around where now, if you're seen as, being primitive and anti-cannabis reform, then it's almost
embarrassing.
Negative. Right.
And as you mentioned, it's over time, young people who realize, it's not gonna, it's about as, it's less dangerous than alcohol. Young people are gonna realize the sensibility of this. But once again, what undergirds the whole discussion to me is there's no correlation between how strict the laws are and how much is consumed. Every opposition point assumes if you legalize smartly, use is gonna go up. And it doesn't. We've done it now. In Colorado and in Washington, use stays essentially the same. What goes up is smart use of your law enforcement and tax revenue. And if you want to appeal to somebody on tax revenue, it's my governor, Jay Inslee, when he was elected the day we legalized marijuana in Washington.
And welcome to office. Here's your key and figure this out.
He knew nothing about it. He didn't even it wasn't his thing. Yeah. And all of a sudden he's in Eric Holder's office talking about these fine points of marijuana leaking into the next state or whatever. And now, 5-6 years later, Governor Inslee he's on board because he knows last year he did not arrest 8,000 people he would have arrested otherwise.
Yeah.
That saves a lot of money and a lot of heartache. And also, we've taken a thriving black market and we've decided to tax the heck out of it and regulate it. And my governor got $310 million of tax revenue last year because of this.
And whatever your political affiliation and whatever your representative's political affiliation, that extra tax revenue money in these state budgets really helps things
and it can be
move
earmarked
smoothly.
And any state gets to design the law to fit their values. So in my state, we have I just have the notes here. We had a $1.4 billion in annual sales, $310 million of tax revenue generated. Of that, $140 million was for the Basic Health Trust Fund, health issues. $90 million was for the general fund, and $40 million was for prevention, education, and health centers. $40 million in my little state for education against drug abuse. And what's really great is when you stop the reefer madness stuff, suddenly parents, teachers, and cops have more credibility with young people about the real dangers of hard drug abuse. What's not to like about that?
And this is always such an interesting conversation when you talk to folks who have been longtime advocates, because the question comes up: how do you talk to your kids about this, and what do your children think? What's their perception? And as things normalize, you hear from opponents that normalization, kids are gonna start thinking that this is okay and that this is and.
Hey, the more okay it is, the less they're going to do it.
Right, it's boring.
It's boring. Grandma's rubbing it on her elbow.
Right. That I think is the favorite. one of my favorite comparisons.
Yeah. So my kids just roll their eyes because they, it's just,
Dad's talking about pot again.
Right.
Here we go.
And why can't a parent say, hey, you can't use the chainsaw, you can't drive my car, you can't have a cocktail, and you can't smoke a joint until you're the right age. So just this is for adults. That's real parenting. Not reefer madness kind of stuff. Because then the kids, you're going to lose credibility and respect from the kids. And they're not dummies with the internet, when their friends out in the street and in the park. We've got to be credible for kids this way. And again, we have a track record. And there's no question in Colorado and in Washington, teen use has not gone up since we legalized. You can make a case that it's actually creeping down. But the fact is, it's harder for kids to get marijuana in my state than in other states, because it's not sold on the streets as much, and it is sold in carefully regulated legal outlets, retail outlets, where you can't get in the door unless you're of age.
Well, and speaking about that, you're someone who's familiar with the regulations and has traveled around quite a bit, and has advocated for, I think smart and pretty comprehensive regulations. And we have a question from Nicole, which is relevant, asking she's asking which state system you think is the best. And, I think there are probably elements of each one. Right. So what do you think are those different elements and, those policy levers which are being pulled effectively, and which ones people should think about? And, here in the East Coast, I want to bring up especially to make sure we talk about lounges. Yeah. Because you talk about this in Amsterdam, it's a big topic in Massachusetts, and it's kind of all over the country. That's sort of the next step in policy. So,
well, Nicole, remember, you take down a prohibition incrementally, and we can learn a lot from the prohibition against alcohol. At first, it was I think it was New York State, and it was just beer, and then other states, and then hard liquor, and then home brew. But they didn't offer home brew until they realized the sky's not going to fall when we start to have alcohol again. So we are going incrementally. In my state, we were so careful because we didn't want to overreach. We knew it was a stretch here, and we just wanted to win the election. So no home grow, very, very strict DUI, very strict defense of employers' rights in the workplace, and all this kind of stuff. What's the best? Well, every state gets to decide what they want. I know Vermont is very interested in not having big corporate structures. They want to have a small business, and I wish it was all that way. And there's a reality, and people have told me, this is the United States of America, it's corporate friendly. There's going to be some big marijuana industries in the future, but it can be done smartly, and I wish it was just small mom and pops and cottage industries, but who knows how we can control that. Society has to decide how greedy are you going to be with taxes. I love the thought of taxing the heck out of it, because more people aren't smoking. You're taking this away from gangs and organized crime. Remember, when you raise $310 million in 1 year in tax revenue in Washington State, that money didn't come out of people's pockets. That came out of the black market industry, and it's just redirected. But we had it a little bit high, I think, on the taxation level, and that keeps a reason for there to be sales on the street. In Oregon, they learned from us, and they cranked down the tax rates, making it cheaper legally, with less of an opportunity for a black market to survive. So you got to finesse it that way. Right? There's a sweet spot. Yeah. And I don't think it needs to be cheap legally, but it's got to be in the ballpark of what is the street cost. And then you got to remember, a normal consumer would far prefer to buy it from a reputable shop than does some guy in the street.
Right. So there's a little bit more of a premium paid for.
Yeah. So you got to look at that, and you got to decide what kind of restrictions are you going to have for advertising. It's interesting to go to Europe, because every country in Europe has a different approach to this. And in Spain, they've got the cannabis clubs, which are interesting. When they can't have retail sales. In the Netherlands, they've completely ignored the back end. They call it the gray area, so they don't know how to. It's just the government doesn't want to know how they retail and distribute. And
it just shows up here in the safe.
It just shows up somehow.
Okay, sure.
And they allow the retail sale of it, and they have the public lounges. In the future, I think home grow is pretty much accepted, and I think it's defensible from a medical marijuana point of view also to have some home grow. And then the other issues are, where can you locate the shops? The other issue is, can you have public lounges? And all of this stuff has to be when the electorate, not when the cannabis community, but when the electorate is comfortable with this.
That's right.
Do you want a marijuana lounge next to an alcohol lounge? Well, they have it in the Netherlands, and it works great. In the Netherlands, it's just kind of, the Dutch people just kind of go, oh yeah, the tourists are all excited about marijuana. It's old news. It's passé in the Netherlands. Most Dutch people never even smell marijuana. It's just, down there, the musicians, the bohemians, and the tourists go to smoke a joint, And so it's I don't know if there's a right answer. It's just, we have to be patient. We have to be incremental. But you got to get over the line and deal honestly with the regulating and retail sales. That's what you got to do, because what Vermont has done, that's coming into effect in July of 2018, is just halfway there. You haven't really, you've still got the gray area. And I mean, it's a huge step, and I'm thankful for that. But you got to take it you got to sort through the complicated back end. And again, nobody had ever tried to do that until 2012, when Washington and Colorado did. And I'm very upfront about our law. We didn't nail everything. We were conservative. We just wanted to win because we wanted to get our foot in the door with this. And every 2 years, the new laws are much smarter than our laws. So, I would look at what they've been coming out with in different states that have passed in the recent years.
And it does seem like, every state that has this conversation is able to sort of stand on the shoulders of all those others. Yeah. I think the comparison you made earlier is that you guys in Washington and Colorado laid down on the barbed wire.
So the barbed wire, you can walk over.
Right, exactly.
And also, remember, the thing about these laws is, if I understand it correctly, the lawmakers can tweak it in the future. Colorado had their law, and they were sloppy about packaging and portions and stuff because kids were getting it.
Right.
And people were overdosing on the edibles. Well, you got to package it, and you got to have stricter portions, and so they fixed that. It's not the end of the world. They're moving forward. They fixed that.
Well, and each place having different concerns beforehand, right? Each place sort of addressing it in a different way as far as kind of how they're going to take that first step. And then each place having its own unique challenges.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to ask, because you started again down in DC and worked your way up the East Coast in Delaware. And I think New Jersey is a place that a lot of people have their eyes on because it's such a major market. Yeah. But I guess I want to get a sense of sort of, how are these conversations different in different regions around the U.S.? Because we're not talking about Nebraska or anywhere there, but even just on the East Coast from your recent trip.
It is interesting, Eli, when you ask that, because here in Vermont, people are really smart and progressive and cool about
thank
this.
you.
Of course, I've just
we all agree. That's true.
I thought Washington was cool, and this state's very cool.
Oh, thank you.
I've been in Delaware, Maryland, and New Jersey, and I think people are overthinking it there. Somebody said, "Well, we've already trained the dogs to smell marijuana. We can't just backpedal on that." As if that matters. You're locking up people for smoking pot, and you're worrying about you trained the dog wrong.
The dogs probably aren't going to complain, in all honesty, right?
I know they'll be all right. They're just they're just the concerns that are being raised. And I've been at this for a long time, and for the first time, AAA, the American Automobile Association, is coming into the discussion. Where did that come from? All of a sudden, they care about road safety.
Yeah.
I want to know, AAA, who gave you some money? Who gave you some money to get excited about this challenge already?
Right.
And why are you cherry picking the data?
Well, and we see the same thing, with alcohol now. I think one of the largest, alcohol conglomerates is investing in cannabis because it's smart business, right?
Yeah.
And I guess that's kind of a question for you as an advocate, and for folks who are also advocates who are watching this is, how effective is that conversation? When we talk about tax revenue. Among advocacy circles, there's the question of is money is not morality, right? But it is an effective argument. It is an effective tool, especially when you're trying to bring on people who might be disinclined. Yeah, the tax revenue. Not just the tax revenue. The thousands of jobs and
in our
tourism.
Country, it's tourism. Even when we were legalizing, a lot of people just wanted to talk about tourism in Washington and Colorado. And I didn't want to talk about tourism because it insults the real issue, which is racism and civil liberties.
It's a very important point.
But the reality is, not people in this room and people in Vermont, but the average American is not very principled when it comes to civil liberties or racism and so on. They want to know, what's it going to be? What's going to impact my taxes, or what's this cost going to be, or whatever. And that's just a reality. And I'll tell you, it'd be pretty tough for anybody to roll back the laws in Washington State now that my government is getting used to getting $300 million a year in tax revenue. California's on board, and California is 10 times our market, so they're going to get a couple billions a year in tax revenue, not to mention tens of thousands of legal jobs, not to mention redirecting your law enforcement away from running down petty pot smokers and into more serious crimes. There are so many reasons. And then, the whole you can even spin the racism thing into an economic issue, because so many lives that matter are derailed because some kid has a joint in his pocket. Then he can't get into school. He can't get a loan. He can't get a job because he was arrested. It happens in 2018. 600,000 Americans were arrested this year. And one reason I'm into this is because it's not me and my friends who are getting arrested. It's people who don't have some dad that can get them out of trouble.
Right. Well, and you know, again, that question of social justice and racial justice. And also, I think when you talk about these different policy levers, right, you know, here's something that you can do that is also corrective. You know, I know it's been a conversation in other states where looking and saying, who's getting these licenses? Right. You know, what barriers to entry are we putting up for people who are going to participate in the legal economy? Right. You know, and saying, hey, if you're somebody who has a marijuana conviction, right, you know, you shouldn't be barred from participating, if anything, you know.
Well, there's expungement, right? That's a
right.
word I've just learned.
Yes, yes.
And it is, okay, so we legalized marijuana in Washington State, and 3 years ago, your cousin was arrested, and now he's got a record. Should he still have a record now that we've legalized it? And I mean, I thought, you know, I try to look at this in what is the normal citizen going to think, and hey, it was illegal when you did it, you made the choice, you broke the law, live with it. The compassionate thing, and I think the just thing would be to say, hey, come on, we've decided this is a stupid law. You broke a stupid law, let's give you a break and expunge your record, clean it up. Mm-hmm. I'm all for expungement. I'm not really all for affirmative action when it comes to giving disadvantaged people an inside track on making money in the marijuana business in the future. I mean, not against it, but yeah. I don't want to get sidetracked on affirmative action when it comes to stop arresting black people. I mean, that's what I want to do.
Right.
Stop. I mean, because when you get it too complicated, you muddy the water and you confuse legislators, you confuse the populace, you confuse the frightened white suburban moms that need to vote for this. We need to remember, we're never going to pass marijuana reform laws relying on people who smoke marijuana. There's not enough.
Yeah.
You gotta appeal to the people that wish marijuana would go away, because that's most of America. And you just gotta explain to them, it's not going to go away. It's already here. It permeates our society. It's not going to get worse when we legalize. We'll just be able to deal with it smartly and stop spending so much money arresting people and take the wind out of the sails of these thriving black markets.
Right. Well, and that's always the funny part too. You know, when you talk about use going up and sort of that red herring, and so much of the conversation is getting caught up in these conversational and rhetorical points, you know, and refuting things and going back and forth. But I think about it from a practical standpoint. You know, the people, that police chief who's sitting there on the other side of the room, I say, are you going to start smoking marijuana? Because it's legal? Like, probably not. You know, I don't see those people who are coming out.
I always say that in my talks.
Opposed.
I say there's not a big reservoir of decent people who would love to ruin their life smoking pot if only it was legal. Right. Now, if you want to smoke pot, you do in this country. And we've proven that in Colorado and Washington because we legalized it and uses stayed essentially the same. The only difference now, Eli, is pot enthusiasts can take their bong out of the cupboard and put it on the bookshelf so people can see it.
Exactly.
They're kind of artistic. They're beautiful on a bookshelf.
Well, and, you know, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, there's that old, the old Jon Stewart character in the movie Half-Baked, you know, and he says something on weed, you know, and you kind of look around the country and it's funny because you see different events where people are organizing symphony events, you know, and it's a cannabis company that's putting it together, you know, and it is kind of just another lens to look through someplace which is already interesting enough.
It's cubism.
You know? Yeah, exactly. You know, with our fractal, you know, sort of sawtooth version.
Different ways to look at something. But, you know,
it kind of comes back to
that's a civil liberty.
Right. Well, and it comes back to the point, you know, for advocates too, is that it's not about glamorization. Right. And in fact, it's the opposite. You know, that when the more boring, the more normal and the more boring it becomes.
In normal, we try to look professional, you know.
Yes.
It's just, and you are too. It's very nice.
I thank you. Twice in 1 week, I know. I'm glad
because it's, you know, if you have some guy with a big bong and dreadlocks, it's going to, I don't care what he thinks, it's going to scare people away. And I just think we've come so far now. And again, in my state and in Vermont here, we've got people who are not in this whole cannabis thing, realizing this law is a tragedy in our society. We've got to stop it. And again, you can frame it in so many ways, and I just really like raising people's awareness about this and talking thoughtfully about it. And we got to get, you know, we don't want to preach to the choir all the time. We got to go out there and talk to people who are scared.
So that's I guess the question, and you know, I think that's really the turning point when you get the folks to the sort of non-conventional, the people who aren't the most
Right.
aren't the most stereotypical. The lawyers and the attorneys and the baby boomers and the more buttoned up folks.
Yeah.
What's the strategy for them? Is it talking about it at a cocktail party, around the bar, at a dinner party? What can they do to start eroding that?
It's so interesting. People don't want to talk about this. I'm a travel writer, so people want me to talk to their meeting, their Rotary Club meeting, or their the economic council in my town wanted me to come and talk. And they said, yeah, can you come next Tuesday morning for breakfast? I said, sure. And they said, what are you going to talk about? I said, I want to talk about marijuana. Oh, no, you can't talk about marijuana. Why not? Right. I said, I'm not going to come unless I can talk about drug policy reform. And I promise you, I'm not pro-pot.
Right.
I just want to talk about ending a very painful prohibition in our society. I said, okay, and they were glad I came because they learned a lot instead of all the cute little cafes in Paris.
Well, right, exactly. Well, it is a sexy, and engaging topic in that it is something that's very much in the public consciousness. Yeah. So it's just having those folks to take it over that next step where, you have your next board meeting at, let's say, an event venue, and you think about, hey, if this is going to be legal in July in Vermont, how is our venue going to handle this? Yep. And now all of your board members are thinking about this, and it's not a...
Take it to church. If you go to church, if you've got friends that go to church, the church council in Seattle wanted to endorse this. They didn't oppose us, but it was too dicey because they didn't want to jump into another complicated area. But let people who are respected members of the religious community know. You see no conflict in this and your values.
Well, and again, it's not as
and
somebody
you can talk about the racism in it.
That's right.
And the social injustice.
Right, and that's a universal, sort of morality message that we don't need to be, love thy neighbor, love thy brother.
And
we don't need to be
black or
criminalizing.
poor, and then lock them up because they're scary to us.
Right. Well, and that I think is a big point, and actually maybe is a good segue to one of the questions we had about the Midwest. Yeah. We're sort of here on the edges of the coast. Right. It seems like maybe for folks who are in the Midwest, in the South, places where they're sort of taking these incremental steps.
Right.
What advice do you give folks and people who are grassroots advocates and activists for kind of getting that started and raising the flag in a place where
join. I'm in Normal, so you can join. Normal has branches in almost every state. I think MPP probably has ways you can get involved. But there's a lot of people that are really upset and concerned about this injustice and this prohibition. And maybe you're a pot enthusiast, maybe you're a civil liberties enthusiast, maybe you're both. It's important to support organizations that are advocating. Advocacy is really important to me. I was just in the halls of Congress a couple of days ago. Every hall was cluttered with gun activists, NRA people.
Yeah.
They understand advocacy. We need to understand that too. And when I give money to Normal or MPP, I know I am paying the wage of a hardworking advocate, a lobbyist who's going to go from office to office in Congress or in state houses here, like I've seen all this week with MPP people, doing the hard work for all of us. They're fighting the battle. And if you enjoy the civil liberty, or if you want to smoke marijuana without breaking the law, if you're not supporting an advocacy group like MPP or Normal, you're really not. You're not doing much. You're just complaining, And maybe in your world you can't get out there and give lectures or make a difference. You can earn some money and support organizations that are doggedly waging this battle. And I'm so impressed by the people I've worked with in Maine, in Massachusetts, in Oregon, in Chicago, in Vermont, in Delaware, all over the place. And it's a day in, day out, dogged struggle, and we're in this together. And we're bringing down an ugly prohibition, just like we brought down, like our grandparents brought down prohibition against alcohol. And when they finally re-legalized alcohol, they weren't saying booze is good. They were saying the law against this drug is causing more harm to our society than the drug use itself. Let's get smart. And we're doing that with pot.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, and you're tireless, somebody who I think all of us can aspire to, and having seen you here in person over the past few days and how hard you work and the people that you reach, even sharing this information, you've made yourself so available. And the idea that you can have somebody who maybe is a family member or, a faith, person in your faith community or a coach or mentor, somebody like that, and share this and say, hey, it's not just me as the token young person, or the hippie or whatever it is. It's there are a lot of other people.
That's why a lot of moms who get it realize that the most dangerous thing about this is if their kid is stupid and has a joint in his pocket at school, he's going to get busted, and then he won't get into college.
Right.
This is a tragedy for that kid.
That's the danger, probably more than
the danger. That's the danger. So, yeah, and you notice we have not cracked a single Cheech and Chong joke, I don't think, this whole hour, which I think is important.
Yes, well, and that's part of it too.
Because this is not a funny issue. I mean, it's fun to joke about it, but when you're being a drug policy reform advocate, I think you got to remind people this is life or death for so many families and communities, and that's why it feels good to be on the side of the truth.
Well, and it's a testament, to your consciousness that we do revert back to that, right? Because there is the economic questions and the possibilities and the tourism and all the fun, jokes and the Cheech and Chong stuff, right. But it's that social justice, it's that racial justice, and I've been really impressed, hearing how much of a part of your advocacy that really is, and I think good for everybody to keep in mind, sort of the fundamental why this is really important from the moral standpoint. I wanted to ask, end with a few more, just a couple kind of more lighthearted questions that we got here, and wanted to say, can you share an experience? What was maybe your most surprising or noteworthy conversation or experience that you had on this most recent East Coast swing, as far as, or somebody maybe that you spoke to or connected with whose opinion surprised you, or where you expected to be received one way and it was totally different, or
well, the discouraging thing, I was in the halls of Congress and I happened to cross paths with Senator Shelby, who's a big, powerful guy in the Senate.
Yeah.
And he loved my books. And he went to Europe and he had a great time with his wife. And he just loved this Rick Steves Europe stuff. And then so we chatted about Europe. And then after a little while he said, so what brings you to Washington, D.C.? And I said, well, we're working to stop the prohibition against marijuana, to legalize, tax, and regulate it. He says, oh, I can't help you there, son. It's just like, that was the end of it. And it's just like, he didn't believe it was wrong. He just knew that it would never sell in his neighborhood, and he just couldn't even get involved in the discussion.
Which is surprising because it's more popular than any single politician consistently in all of the elections, right? In Florida,
I think politicians are behind the curve on this in that way. You're right about that. But then the opposite. I went to Montpelier, and Vermont here. Whoa. The senators and the reps there to go to that beautiful state house and talk to caring public servants who are sorting through this. They're evolving in their understanding of it. They're talking and asking hard questions, and they're sitting together in the cafeteria discussing how they should work this to make it good for the community. And I thought, this is what representative democracy is all about. And I'm just so impressed by the thoughtfulness and the compassion that comes out of this Vermont State House, and not everybody's on board, but they're talking and they're learning, and I'm sure that over time the truth will prevail. People are steep on the learning curve. Mm-hmm. We're having to rewire ourselves after literally billions and billions of dollars of reefer madness propaganda that has taught everybody this is an evil weed, and
decades and decades. It's going to take time,
and I think we need some capable spokespeople who are not scary, who can raise awareness of the serious issues here. And again, you can frame it in so many ways, and the more you know about it, the more fun it is to share this with people who really need to know what's going on.
Well, and maybe we'll end on that. Sort of one thing I think that's been interesting with cannabis and is that all the different kinds of people in different walks of life. Right. And you're somebody who travels the world, get to talk about cannabis policy, and also experience all these different cultures. And I'm wondering maybe if you can leave us with a travel experience, whether it be in a legal state in the U.S. or in Europe, that involved cannabis that sort of surprised you, or maybe where cannabis opened the door or put a unique kind of twist on something you were doing already, or maybe you were in Spain researching something totally different and walked into a social club without even knowing that it was going to happen. But
I don't want to talk about my experiences smoking pot abroad necessarily, but I will talk about how in Europe you just don't paint drug policy with a broad brush. Every country has its own policies, and for me it's just really interesting to see how Europeans are finding creative ways to stop legislating morality and start finding pragmatic harm reduction ways that they can help their community sort out this complicated issue. Pragmatic harm reduction is what drives things in Europe. Moralization and incarceration is what drives things in a lot of cases here in the United States, and I'm inspired by Europe in that regard a lot.
Well, we thank you again for joining us and inspiring all of us, and not only helping us guide so many of us through Europe and through our travels, but through this conversation, because again, your value as an advocate and activist who helps bridge so many of these gaps, and make this a less scary, less sort of fringe topic is incredibly invaluable for all of us, and especially with the social justice undergirding it. You know, I mean, again, it's so easy to get caught up in everything else, and you have this great way of simplifying and saying, no, this is wrong, and we know why.
And there's nothing wrong with emphasizing the civil liberties end of this.
Yeah.
I've had police officers track me and know all of my things that I talk about, and they say, I disagree with you on almost everything, but the one thing I agree with you is the civil liberties. Americans should be able to exercise their civil liberty. And as I like to say in my talks, I'm a hardworking, church-going, kid-raising, tax-paying American citizen. If I work hard all day long and I go home and I want to smoke a joint and just stare at the fireplace for 3 hours, that's my civil liberty, right? That's America.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much, Rick. It's been an honor. We appreciate having you. Thank you guys for joining us here, the studio audience.
Thanks for watching.
And thank you guys for joining us online. Please share this with your friends.
Happy travels.
Beautiful.
Even if you're just staying home.